So Rick Wilson is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, a project which was founded in 2019 by former Republicans and incumbent Republicans to basically prevent Donald Trump from being re-elected. Rick, thanks so much for making time again for Deutsche Welle.
I'm delighted to be back with you, Ines.
So it's about 1 year when we saw the storming of the Capitol from Trump supporters, basically to prevent the peaceful transition of power.
Yes.
How do you feel when you see these images again?
Well, unfortunately, my colleagues and I predicted that there would be violence and that Trump would not cede power willingly or peacefully. We wrote an article in the Washington Post in December about this time last year, and it was prescient in terms of our understanding that the kind of person Donald Trump is, the kind of politics he represents. One of the most fundamental norms of American politics is the peaceful transition of power. You have to have in a democratic republic, you have to have somebody who loses an election be willing to lose. They have to be willing to lose. And if they lose fair and square, no matter how brutal the campaign is traditionally, whether it was, in our lifetimes, very contested elections, Al Gore, for instance, at the end of the day, he fought hard, but he didn't do violence. He didn't encourage violence. He said, okay, I lost, I concede. We knew Donald Trump would never do that. We understood from the beginning his psychology would prevent him from doing that. And the people around him, who frankly are authoritarians or at least authoritarian adjacent, were increasingly unwilling to play by the rules of American political life and discourse. And so we knew it was coming. That didn't make it any less outrageous. The scope and the degree to which those folks were encouraged by Donald Trump and his advisors and his allies was something that, when it happened, the monster got out of the box very quickly. They lost control over it, and we came within a few minutes in this country of having an angry, violent mob of Trump supporters. If they had run into members of Congress or the U.S. Senate, there would have been bloodshed, and it would have shattered this country even more than an attack on our democratic system would have.
Would you say that January 6th was a real turning point of American politics?
I believe it was. I believe it was a very consequential day because it told two problematic stories. The first was that there was a justification based on the big lie that Trump won the election. He did not win the election under any circumstances. By no measure or merit did he win this election. But it locked in the minds of millions of people that whatever actions they took were justified because it was stolen. They believe they live in a country with an illegitimate president, with a fraudulently elected president. We all know that's wrong, but it doesn't stop it from becoming a part of their mythology. And the second reason I think it's such a consequential day is political violence in America has always been at the very ragged edges. And whether it's political violence on the left or the right, it's always been on the very ragged edges. This mainstreamed it, where millions of Americans didn't see the people charging the Capitol at 1/6 as traitors. They didn't see them as insurrectionists. They saw them as people like them. They saw them as people taking a stand again for that other part of the big lie. They saw them as people who were justified in their actions. And the fragility of democracy around the world has become increasingly apparent in the last 3 or 4 years. The rise of authoritarianism and nationalism and personality cult politics has become increasingly evident. And I'm sorry, my dogs are going to bark a little bit today. Has become increasingly evident, and that problem is of such a scale and of such a degree that it was symptomatic of something that's happening in other countries around the world. But in America, we had a certain degree of pride in our peaceful transitions of power and in our political system's resilience and resistance to that kind of activity. And unfortunately, we were wrong about that. And it's something that, at the Lincoln Project, we had to really we looked at our goals for 2020, and the goals were to prevent Donald Trump from seeking office or gaining office for a second term, to neutralize a lot of the enablers of Trump, and finally to push back and to break the back of Trumpism. And I mean, we use Trumpism as a shorthand for authoritarian nationalism. The difficulty was we did great on the first assignment, did okay on the second, but on the third, we never really devoted the time that we should have to breaking that movement as effectively as we could, and to shattering that idea that that kind of violence-based nationalist movement was justified or acceptable in American politics. We should have done more on that. And that's one of the things we've had to refocus on as the year has showed us, that Trump himself is continuing to repeat the big lie. Fox News has continued to repeat the big lie. And that's the most important normative force in American politics. And so, we've had to recalibrate a lot of what we've done and needed to do. But that fight is obviously going to have to continue.
Yeah, and that would be my question. I mean, the Pentagon just put out a warning that one of the biggest threats here in the States is really like domestic terrorism. So some people really are worried that we might face another kind of civil war. What's your thinking about that? How violent could it get?
It could get 1860 violent. That's unfortunately the truth. And it is a country right now that has factionalized and balkanized among or in geographic terms, in political terms, and in social terms in a way that's never been seen in America since the 1860s. And that danger that we face right now comes from the fact that this country is so fundamentally at odds, where there's no presumption of goodwill on either side, where there's no ability to compromise or willingness to compromise on either side of the equation, and where the Republican Party has transformed itself in this post-Trump era. They've said what we call, as we said, they've said the quiet part out loud. And the quiet part is we will contain, we will retain power at any cost. We will hold the offices we wish to hold, no matter what the other side wants. We will decide who counts the votes, how the votes are counted, where the votes are counted, how the votes are certified. They have built a structure in a very short window, an autocratic structure in a very short window of time, that has put American democracy in an enormous degree of peril. And so the threat of violence is, unfortunately, and this isn't just in America, but the threat of violence is an enormously powerful political tool. It is something that people trying to live their normal lives and trying to live their everyday existences do not want to face. It intimidates because it is meant to. It frightens because it is meant to. And there's only one side of the political equation in America right now that has embraced violence. There's only one side that is excusing it as a political tactic, and that's the Republican Party, of which I was a member for 30 plus years.
So when I travel the States, and I do that quite a bit, my feeling is that more and more people really are turning their back to politics. They're just tired. They're sick of it. They don't want to know anything about it anymore.
Well,
that's also a huge
in that old sort of semi-cliched phrase, Americans may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in them. And so we're in a country now where you can't avoid the politicization of every aspect of life. I mean, we're facing up to a COVID crisis that has cost us nearly 1 million dead Americans. And there are people who look at whether they'll get treated or vaccinated or get a booster shot. They look at that as a political act. They look at, whether they wear a mask in public or don't as a political act. They look at what kind of car they drive, where they live, where they send their kids to school as a fundamentally political statement. And I think it makes the country more divided and weaker along those fault lines that could lead us to civil conflict in this country. And the idea that we can escape it is it's a natural response. in the minds of people who are just fatigued. They spent 5 years watching Trump burn down every institution in this country, tear apart, Americans at every different, fracture point. And they are tired. They're exhausted. We've lived through 2 years of COVID. We've come out of the Trump economic crisis that happened because he mismanaged COVID so badly on the front end of the problem. But we still face enormous stresses and difficulties. There's a rising in worry about inflation in the country. And so Americans are driven to sort of turn inward. But on the other hand, all the other forces in society have pushed them outward so that everything is interpreted politically now. And everything is seen through a political, as a political signifier. Every act is now seen as a political signifier.
We are facing a midterm election a little bit less than a year from now. Talk a little bit about that. And then, unfortunately, I think we have to talk about what all that means for the possibility that Donald Trump will be running again in 2024.
Well, look, the midterm elections are always extraordinarily difficult for the incumbent political party. And there's only been one example in our lifetimes. I was talking to my partner, Stuart Stevens, this morning about this. We were very much involved in the 2002 midterms, which was the only time in modern American history where the incumbent party retained seats. Now, that was primarily because the 9/11 attacks turned the 2002 election into a referendum on national security. But when you look back at incumbent parties holding the House, it is a very difficult equation. In 1994, you saw Bill Clinton won, and the Democrats in 92, the Democrats got wiped out in 1994. In 2004, the Republicans had, 2002 and 4 had two very good cycles. In 2006, blown out because that was when it went back to normal. In 2010, Barack Obama had a sweeping victory and a sweeping victory in the House. In 2010, he got blown out, 62 seats. And so that cycle is something very common and very, explicable in American politics. And so that puts the Democrats at the first disadvantage. The second disadvantage is redistricting in red states is engineered. Essentially, that is going to get the Republicans 12 to 14 seats without breaking the sweat. They don't have to do anything. They'll just design seats that only Republicans can win. Then there are the headwinds of a divided Democratic Party, where the progressives want everything tomorrow. They want the birthday cake and the pony. And the moderates want to win elections and take back, a larger majority in the Senate and a larger majority in the House. And all of them are mad at Biden because he doesn't do either what the progressives want or the centrists want. Biden has had a very, he's actually had a couple of very enormously important accomplishments that got undersold and got forgotten about. And I mean this with the sense of tough love to my Democratic colleagues. They're terrible at politics. They are the worst thing. They are so bad at elections. There's a reason why Republicans beat them consistently, because Republicans grow up in a campaign culture that prizes victory over everything else. That may be amoral, that may be difficult, that may be problematic, but it's true. And the Democrats have this idea that policy will win elections, et cetera. And I don't know that they're mentally prepared to run the kind of races they have to run in 2022 to hold the House and to hold the Senate. And the margins are so narrow in both bodies that it is going to be an extremely difficult thing if they don't understand they're fighting against people. The Democrats are playing chess and the Republicans are eating the pieces. They're not going to play by the rules. They're going to go out and try to make this into a huge culture war. They're going to try to go out and make this into a huge social war. And the Democrats really need to focus on, a broad electoral strategy that is not going to be, about fantasies of like critical race theory and all these other things the Republicans are trying to bait them into fighting on. They need to fight on the economy, which is the number one issue in the country by far, by an order of magnitude in some cases. And they need to focus on that narrow slice of disaffected Republican voters who are not Trumpers, the kind of people that built the Lincoln Project and the Lincoln Project talks to all the time. Those are voters who may be Republican behaviorally, but they cannot in good conscience vote for the people that are going to bring Donald Trump back. Now, what happens if the Democrats lose the House? There's a very meaningful chance that you will have Donald Trump named as the Speaker of the House. You do not, in American politics, have to be an elected official to be named the Speaker of the House. There are about 80 votes in the House right now in the Republican caucus that would vote for Trump, over any other human being. There's a meaningful chance that happens. At that point, chaos reigns in the country. If it's not Trump, it's going to be someone like Jim Jordan or Marjorie Taylor Greene or Matt Gaetz or Paul Gosar who becomes the speaker. And that person will immediately initiate impeachment hearings against Joe Biden, a whole suite of investigations, no matter how spurious and ridiculous they are, against the Biden administration, all to set up the predicates for the 2022 election, or 2024 election, excuse me, in which Trump will return. It is our belief that
so do you think that he will return, however?
If Donald Trump is not dead or in jail, he is running for president. There is no question. We see all the signs in his fundraising, in all the political action groups he's putting together, in his continued press into media, his continued role with Republican voters. Look, there's a lot of polling out there on this, and it averages around 70% of Republican voters want Donald Trump to run again and will vote for him over any other Republican candidate in that field. So no one's going to run against him in the Republican primary. I mean, for all that Ted Cruz and Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott and Josh Hawley and all these other, Marco Rubio, all these other guys want to be president, if Trump runs in the primary, they will drop out so fast your head will spin, and Trump will be the Republican nominee. In fact, he won't even end up having to run for the nomination. Most of the states, Republican parties will just declare that he's the nominee. That's it. It's done. So he will have, we will start the campaign in probably January of 2023. There will not be an interval. There will not be a break or a gap. It will be a constant campaign. The Democrats will not understand how to fight it because they will be facing Republican dominance in the House and constant hearings and investigations, and they won't know how to push back on it. Trump will go out there, continue to drive the states into positions where they pass these voting registration and voting and election restrictions, which minimizes the ability of African-American voters and Hispanic voters to get out and vote. There's a great example in Georgia of a Trump group took over a local elections board this week, and they have now closed 6 of the 7 polling places in the African-American community in the county. It's not a coincidence. It's a plan. It's a program. They're smart people running all this. They may be evil, but they're very bright people. We know them. We all worked with them for years and years. So it is going to be a very difficult, beating if the Democrats hold on in 2022, Trump will still run in 24. It will make it more difficult. It will be more problematic. It will not be a straight shot for him, but it is going to be, I tell my ex-Republican friends and my Democratic friends, don't have a failure of imagination. We all failed in our imagination in 2015 and 2016 because everyone thought, how is a clown like Donald Trump, a game show host like Donald Trump, going to win the nomination? That's absurd. It will never happen. And he did. And then they said, he'll never beat Hillary Clinton. She runs a great campaign. She's so smart. She's so established. She's so smart. But he did. So we have to be in a position where we understand the realities, where we don't fail to imagine the worst case scenario. And the worst case scenario is if Trump is elected in 2024, by January of 2025, we don't have a functioning democracy in this country. He will immediately take as much action as he can to essentially become president for life. And people think I'm being dramatic or exaggerating that, but I know the people he is surrounded by, guys like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller. They are unashamed authoritarians. They are unashamed fascists. They are unashamed statists. They believe that this country needs to be fundamentally broken and remade in their image, and they will use him as the vector for that attempt. Is
there anyone, Rick, in the Republican Party who is really going to fight that within the GOP? I mean, no. Those who left.
No. Look, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are doing yeoman's work right now. There are about 30 Republicans in the House who are publicly for Trump and privately opposed, but they will not do anything. They fear for their lives. Political violence has terrified all of them. They get death threats all the time. They do not want to be killed by the mob. And that's one of the reasons that 1-6 was it was a darkly brilliant political move by Steve Bannon and Roger Stone and Alex Jones, all these people that organized it, because it sent a message not just to Democrats, but to Republicans. If you cross us, if you do not support Trump and the big lie, we will come and try to kill you. And that's not a functioning republic at that point. That is a country where we have slipped into a degree of danger about whether we're going to continue in this experiment, as a democracy and as a republic, then maybe on the precipice of failure. And I think if Trump wins in 24, it will fail. We will have lost what America had been for 245 years.
So Rick, until then, what does the world have to expect from the states? I mean, they will be so self-concerned or so self-centered in anything they're doing. So.
Well, look, I do know that the Biden administration understands that we can't withdraw from the world, and we have to reestablish some of the normative forces that led the NATO alliance, for instance, for years to serve as a force of stabilization. Trump tried to undermine it and destroy it. The Biden administration is trying to rebuild that. They're trying to rebuild a sense of cohesiveness in the world order. It is a hard hill to climb when you have a very narrow political margin in both the House and the Senate. It is a hard hill to climb when people like Ted Cruz are blocking the appointment of ambassadors, blocking the appointment of military officials, blocking the appointment of people who would be in charge of American foreign policy. So it makes it much more difficult to try to shore up those institutions, especially at a time when China is expanding its global reach and global power, when Russia, although Russia may be a third-rate economy, it's got a first-rate intelligence service, and it's disrupting, Europe everywhere from Belarus to Ukraine to the Baltics. I mean, in all these cases, strong international leadership from either the U.S. or U.S. and its allies together is a necessary element of future stability, but it's going to be difficult to accomplish that in many ways while we have so much political uncertainty and instability here at home.
In this inside. So give me a little bit hope at the end of the presentation. What could happen?
There's an old joke that God protects drunks and Americans. And look, it isn't just the sort of providential nature of the American story, because the nature has been, America has had a lot of providential good luck over time. It's not just that, because luck is not a strategy, but there are millions and millions of Americans who are increasingly understanding the risk we face and the trouble ahead. And those millions of Americans have come out. They've crossed party lines in many cases. And I think at some point, even the Democrats, who are not the most graceful or skillful political party, they will come to understand they're in the fight of their lives. And I mean that not in the political sense, but in the literal sense, that you've got to win against these people and this movement, or the consequences are almost unimaginable.
Okay, well, I thank you, and I'm sure we will continue this conversation.
I would love to. Thank you, Ines.